certain fights, to some people, talking critics or people that are very cynical, put me in a very no-win situation, a very uncomfortable situation, but I've always been able to succeed.
The cynicism is sneering, not just from the public at times, not just from the press, but sometimes even from some of your boxing colleagues. We're going to talk about the Duran fight in just a few moments, but let's take the clock back a little bit and talk about the aftermath of the Thomas Hearns II fight. Iran Barkley, who had somewhat of a stake, I guess, in the outcome of that fight, maybe, in that he wanted to perhaps fight Thomas Hearns, or even you at some point, had a reaction after seeing the draw, the very controversial draw, and he was a bit bitter after the fight ended. We talked to Iran Barkley of what he thought of the outcome, the fact that it ended in a draw. Here's what Barkley said.
Let me tell you, the fight was wrong. I mean, it was judged wrong. Tommy won the fight, and I don't think it's right that, you know, the way should be paid for Leonard like it is. You know, Tommy won, and anybody in the whole wide world can see that Tommy won.
It should be paid for Leonard. The perception is that somehow all the big high rollers in some way are in bed monetarily, economically with Leonard. They won't let Leonard lose if there's money at stake. Do you understand that cynicism?
Well, I understand the comments and statements from some of the media, some of the fighters. Naturally, everyone can't love you. They don't particularly care for you. Because what I stand for, Roy, I've been in this game for a number of years, and I've been very successful. Because I stand as a free agent, it has a tendency to frustrate people because I'm doing what is not expected of me.
Well, you certainly didn't expect, I don't think, the kind of fight you had with Hearns. As we take a look back at that fight, I don't think you expected to be hit as hard and as often as Tommy did.
Well, anytime you fight a Tommy Hearns, I think what people fail to realize, Tommy Hearns is a great fighter. I went into this fight, and people claim that I underestimated Tommy Hearns. I never did. In fact, Roy, throughout the promotional tour, I found myself somewhat defending Tommy Hearns' honor because there were those that said Tommy Hearns should not be licensed to fight because of his performance with James Kitchen, because of his fight with Iran Barkley. I said Tommy Hearns is a natural fighter. He's a great fighter, and he proved that.
I remember reading something that said you were maybe reading too many of the news reports prior to the fight, and you almost believed at one point that if you didn't knock him out in the first round, it would be disappointing. You were almost buying into the press hype.
Well, it becomes somewhat subliminal because you read so much negative news about the fight itself, the ridicule. I mean, at one time during one of the stops, the tour, someone asked me, one of the reporters said, Ray, did you notice a difference in Tommy Hearns' speech pattern? So did you ask him that? It just got frustrating to me. And they would see if I had knocked Tommy Hearns out one round, it'd been no big deal. But to have Tommy to have went the distance, in the eyes of the media, because they try to justify everything that they write, they say, well, Tommy Hearns is a winner.
Your colleague at HBO, Larry Merchant, made a very good point. If it was just a young, up-and-coming fighter that fought Tommy Hearns the way you did, and it wasn't Sugar Ray Leonard, they'd say, wow, we got a hell of a young fighter on his way. But because it was Sugar Ray Leonard and you didn't knock him out with the flurry, what I'm going to do now is take a look at some of the comments people have made, most recently in a piece in Sport magazine. First, this is Emmanuel Stewart. This is part of the personal attacks that we talked about at the very top. Emmanuel Stewart, of course, the trainer for Thomas Hearns. He talked about Sugar Ray Leonard, and this is what it said. It wasn't enough that he, Leonard, didn't have to fight any middleweight contenders to get a shot at Hagler. Then there's that whole situation with Donnie Lalonde. Then he was saying he was going to do right by Tommy and giving Tommy Hearns a rematch, that he was going to be into boxing now and give the fans what they want. Then, not 2 weeks later, I see him in the paper with this short little fat man, Duran. I think people have said this is all just too much. The attacks began. And right after the fight, but somewhat even before that, about you.
You know, Roy, I've heard about these innuendos and statements, negative criticism from all these so-called people that represent the sport of boxing. But I've yet to see the type of negative response from my fans who support me wholeheartedly. My fight with Hagler, there were those that said, well, this fight shouldn't be made. Ray has no chance. This will hurt the sport of boxing. And the fight became not just a success for me physically, but financial success. And then there was the Lalonde fight, Donnie Lalonde. They said, well, this fight shouldn't be made because it's not real, contrived. I mean, all kinds of statements they made about the fight, and that fight did better than the Hagler fight.
See, cynicism is one thing, and there's a healthy cynicism with the press, but when it gets to personal stuff, and it almost borders on character assassination, Davis Miller writes in Sport Magazine this piece, where it started to get into not just digging, being critical of your style. We'll take a look at the quote now. There's something about Sugar Ray Leonard, he writes, that many of us perceive as not quite on the level. An old-fashioned way of saying it would be that he has a certain swarminess, he writes about him. At times he seems to be the Michael Landon of boxing. He has the same kind of false sincerity. That is, until he gets to work in the ring. At that point, he begrudgingly gave you credit. In other words, people question your integrity and your sincerity, that it's only money that you're after.
You know what bothers some of these people is the fact that because I operate my career in the past and now as a business, I'm a free agent. I mean, the same people that are advocates of these college students or athletes being able to go to wherever they want to go or play for whatever team they want to play, because I do the same, I'm doing the same thing, and that's a certain contradiction, I find.
And you're basically alone in that,
Yes,
you know?
I am, Roy, and
by yourself.
And I don't quite understand them. But again, my father told me a long time ago, you can't please the world. At this stage in my career, I'm 33 years old, and I fight maybe once or twice a year, and that bothers those people.
We're going to come back with Sugar Ray Leonard in just a few moments. We're going to talk about how he can perhaps take some of the negativity and make it work for him, and we'll also take a look back at No Mas, the fight that set it up for Uno Mas. We'll do it after this. Sports Book. One more quote, and this again from a guy that you know knows boxing quite well. I think Ray is going to do now, though, is trying to make himself a villain so people will come to see him lose. Then he thinks he can change the public reaction by dazzling them. Is there in the back of your mind, maybe in the subconscious, part of that as part of your game plan?
That's a new one to me, Roy. I've never thought of myself as being a villain. People appreciate me and respect me for being Ray Leonard. And that's what I appreciate. I appreciate the fan support.
Yeah.
You know, because they're the ones that paying for my son's college education. I respect them.
All right, Roberto Duran, the No Mas fight in New Orleans in 1980. People called it a disgrace. They just said he, in some quotes, quit, quote, like a dog that night. When you look back at this, can you really still understand it? Do you think he did it because you beat him psychologically more than physically?
I've tried on numerous occasions to explain what I felt was the culprit of this bizarre event. I said through frustration and humiliation, pretty much did Roberto Duran in. What bothered me, I'm going to take it a step further, Roy. What bothered me the most was the fact that there was more emphasis placed on why Duran quit as opposed to what I did to him. I mean, they tried to do some medical research to find out what internally was wrong with Duran. No one really gave me credit, and people tried to find a way to rationalize what actually took place.
There are some people who suggest that the real motivation for Roberto Duran is not in any way redemption for having lost that fight in an embarrassing fashion, but merely an issue of economics, of commerce. The IRS is all over his back. He's only doing it for the money. What do you think about that?
I don't particularly believe that, because people that make those type of accusations and those statements about Duran, they don't know fighters. We are a totally different group of people because we enjoy the win, the victory of defeating each other. It goes beyond that. I mean, although it's nice to have a good piece of change, but for the most part, Roy, winning is everything to a fighter.
A couple of weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, he was at close to 190 pounds. He will be at 158. Big weight loss, but he is apparently in shape. Take me in the ring with Roberto Duran. You're looking off right across the ring, and you see this guy coming out. We'll take a look at some stills down through the years of the two fights earlier. What's it like to fight this man unlike anybody else?
Because a fighter knows another fighter, and I can look at a fighter in his eyes to see discouragement. I can see whether or not there's frustration there. I see a sense of apprehension. I can tell when a fighter is pretty much giving up internally. And with Duran, I saw the frustration. I saw that he was becoming a little more reluctant to throw punches. But then there's another side of Duran that very few people know except the ones that's been in the ring with him.
You think he fights to the level of his competition, that he'll really get it together for someone like you?
Duran, like Tommy Hearns, like Hagler, like myself, we're able to rise to the occasion because when people knock Duran because of his diet, they say he's
or
old.
lack of it.
Yes, and Roy, I would not try to defend Duran here because I have trained myself for almost 2 months for one person, Roberto Duran. I don't care if he's 900 pounds the day before the fight. That's his problem. I'm training hard for him.
We take a look at what Carlos Palomino, the former welterweight champion who was defeated by that man on the right, Roberto Duran. Carlos Palomino said this recently in the New York Times, or actually the Los Angeles Times. He said, I found Roberto Duran to have average punching power. He was a devastating puncher at lightweight, but never at welterweight or middleweight. But the thing is, he hits you just hard enough to get your attention. The key, he said, is to make him respect you early in the fight, and if you don't do that, he will try to walk right through you.
I agree with that. I think there's a lot of validity to what Carlos was saying, because Duran, because of his style, because of his mentality, if you allow him to create momentum and confidence, you have a long night. It's like anything else. It's all relative. Roy, I think if you give any fighter enough grounds to initiate respect, you got a long night.
Next in line, apparently, certainly has been bandied about in the press, of course, is Michael Nunn, even though Michael Nunn did not fight one of his best fights against Iran Barkley. When Michael was on our program, he talked about the prospect of fighting you, or the interest he would have, piqued interest at that. Here's what he had to say.
No, I don't buy none of it. You know, Ray, he's so unpredictable. You know, he's a true champion. He's a great champion. And by me rising to superstardom, I think I'll bring him out sooner or later.
You figure the fight, if you win here, is next in line for your career, or are you, again, going to just take them one at a time, the old sports cliche?
Well, you should listen to what Michael Nunn is saying. I'm unpredictable. But in all sincerity, Roy, I'm not thinking about anyone. I'm not thinking about Hearns, Michael Nunn, Marvin Hagler. They always tell me who's next, who's next. No one's next. Christmas is next for me. Right now, Roberto Duran, December 7th.
At the Mirage, we might add, and that's coming up next Thursday night. We'll come back with Sugar Ray Leonard, one of the great winners in the decade of the 80s. We'll talk about other great winners. And Sugar Ray Leonard, our guest on Sports Click. Talk to me about the physical act of fighting compared to the other great athletes, the other great sports. We're talking about not just holding your arms up for 3 minutes, but moving, running, essentially, throwing punches, trying to breathe, and getting hit all the same. Could it be the toughest physical act in terms of sport of all?
I would have to say so. I don't think people appreciate the type of conditioning, physically, mentally, that is required to be the best in the sport of boxing, because people look at the sport of boxing and say, well, there's two guys holding gloves up, and that's it. That's why you find a lot of premature retirements from guys that come out of football, baseball, hockey, whatever, trying to dominate the sport of boxing. It's not that easy.
How about guys who say, oh, yeah, I'll take $10 million to fight Mike Tyson. Sure, I'll get... They don't realize. You had an expression, and it was true. I'm out there risking my life, quite literally. I mean, that's not just rhetoric. You mean that, and it's true.
That's why the time that I have in that dressing room is so important. I need total peace and quiet. I don't need it to be totally jammed and inundated with people. I just need a moment of prayer, a moment to myself to focus in on what I must do.
I don't mean this in a social scene, but in terms of an emotional kind of loneliness. How lonely is it to be both the champion and just to be a fighter anyway? It's a pretty lonely profession, isn't it?
Well, to be the best, to be on top of it, you must sacrifice. And that's a very, very important word when I say sacrifice, because you give up so much of your life, family time, everything, your social activity, everything, because everything else becomes totally irrelevant, obsolete. Because to be the best, these things have to be secondary.
I was thinking about this today. In terms of the 80s, and we're finishing the 80s, you'll be, I think, the only fighter in history who began a decade as champ, and if you win, end the decade as champ. In terms of 80s, you're one of the greatest, if not the greatest winner of all athletes in sport. Let's talk about your perspective of other great winners in the 80s. Let's start with Magic Johnson in another sport. There's another great winner, 5 championships with the Lakers. What's your perspective on a guy like Magic?
Magic Johnson is consistent, continuity. I like what I see in him because with Magic, you know, he's so innovative. He reminds me a lot of what I do in the ring. He's innovative, and he's dazzling. I mean, he's always creating. The assists, the passes. I mean, it's awesome. I love it.
You were a basketball player for a very brief period of time in Maryland, right?
I was, but
no D, right?
Well, I wasn't first round draft pick. I mean, so I had to pursue something that was more in my alley.
You told me you put the ball up a lot, though. You're not really concerned with the defense.
I was not a team player. You know, I'm a one-on-one man.
I guess.
Totally.
What do you think about when you think of Wayne Gretzky? There's another great winner from the 80s.
Wayne Gretzky, I mean, a total dominance of one sport. Again, he reminds a certain similarity there because Wayne, I mean, he's able to do things on the ice that people ordinarily can't do on the ground because he's dazzling and he's quick. And
are you awed by that somewhat?
Well, I had the pleasure of meeting Wayne years ago, and he's very deceptive. I mean, his size and his personality. I love it. In all, yes, because he's able to do what people say you can't do.
Yeah.
With the puck.
Yeah. I was going to say, but the thing I was going to interrupt you about was in terms of the glamour. Certainly Wayne Gretzky is a glamorous athlete, Magic Johnson too, but there's nothing like the glamour of the Super Bowl champion quarterback, Joe Montana, the Golden Boy. Here's a guy who gets all of the notoriety focused in on him winning the Super Bowl 3 times in the 80s as well. What do you think about when you think of Montana?
Well, I just saw the game against the Giants.
Yeah, Monday night.
And for Joe Montana to throw that football, you know, when he's being crumbled, I mean, all of a sudden he's able to release that ball and make that pass is incredible. And Joe is the kind of player that's able to rise to the occasion, no matter what the opposition is.
I know you like tennis. Maybe Boris Becker would be one of your heroes because of his dominance again in the 80s, and he's still a young guy. What impresses you about Becker?
He's a risk taker. He goes after the ball. I mean, a man so big jumping at that ball, I mean, it's like his last meal. He just jump over there and he get that ball. I like to see it when he falls, when he jumps for a ball, you know, desperation.
Well, I want to say, as a fighter, it doesn't pay to be a risk taker, or does it? Do you like to take, is it a good thing to take risks in the ring, Ray?
We accept the risk. That's what makes us who we are.
Inherent, but I mean, once you get out there, taking a gamble, throwing something maybe that would be a big risk punch that would leave you open, etc.
Well, you have to. I mean, you just hope that you get in before they do. And again, well, that's what makes us who we are, because people see me, they say, I would never do that. If I was in your position, if I had what you had, I wouldn't do that. That's why you're not Ray Leonard. Anything
you wouldn't do athletically that just say, not for me, no way?
Play golf with my attorney.
One of those, huh? I got you. Well, we'll talk about that in the break, perhaps. Ray Leonard, our guest on Sports Talk. Our final segment, we'll talk about his good friend, confidant, and Mutual Admiration Society co-holder. That's Mike Tyson.
Después termina en su presentación. Todavía le queda el nombre.